Hello everyone, and welcome back to Reverse Engineering Linux 32-bit applications. In this video, we're going to start moving in a slightly different direction. In this course, up until now, we have talked about reverse engineering Linux applications with the intention of finding vulnerabilities in them. And now I want to start talking about another reason that you might want to be doing reverse engineering with Linux, and that is if you have some suspected malware and you want to understand it. So in this video, I'm going to give you kind of an overview of what's to come and also give you some of the basics, things that we should consider if we're going to reverse engineer any kind of malware. So the first thing you want to do, if you have this unknown binary and you're suspicious of it, is determine whether or not it's malware. Well, how can you do that? And we're going to drill down in some future videos with a little bit more detail on this, but I wanted to start with things like the file command. File command you've probably used before. It's a very basic command. It will tell you what kind of a file something is. So you can see if it's a 64-bit ELF file, perhaps it's a 32-bit ELF file. You might get the idea that things are a little bit easier to exploit, definitely with 32-bit. And you might also see a little bit more malware in the 32-bit world than the 64-bit world. We'll also talk about how you can determine if it's a known bad file. One of the ways that you can do this is to use a hash. So there are several databases of hashes for known files out there that you can access. So you can perform a hash of your file and then see if it's found in those databases. Now, as we all know, it is a pretty simple matter to change the hash. You change one little bit and the hash changes. So this isn't a great way of finding malware as much as a good way of determining that something is not malware. If it's a known good file, that's much more useful. We'll talk about using some simple things like a strings command. Strings command you've probably used before, and that allows you to see all the various strings inside of a file. We will also look at what we call static analysis. Static analysis involves looking at a binary but not running it. So you're looking at the binary at rest, if you will. This is much safer than actually running malware. And there are a few tools that we will talk about with that, such as the NM tool, which can be used to list symbols. There's a tool LDD, which will list shared libraries. We'll also talk a little bit more about the file format for an ELF file and how you can kind of get the big picture of what's going on using a tool such as readelf. Finally, in the static analysis category, we will talk about things like objdump, which can be used to disassemble your file. From there, we will move on to talk about dynamic analysis. Now, dynamic analysis is something you have to do very carefully. Think about it for a second. I want to go run some possibly bad software on my computer. Doesn't sound like a great idea to take my main workstation and just have at it. So Either I want to have a separate machine, which is sometimes done, or more conveniently, I can use a virtual machine and I can run all of my suspected malware inside of that. One thing you should be aware of is that some malware is smart enough to determine that it's being run inside of a virtual machine. It assumes that is then being studied, not just part of a deployed virtual machine, and it won't run or it won't run properly. This is a way of thwarting your efforts to understand what it does. We will talk about how you can trace through system calls with strace. We did briefly use this tool before, and we'll use it again for reverse engineering malware. There's a similar tool called ltrace that you can use to trace library calls. And then we will talk about reverse engineering using a debugger. Of course, there's always good old GDB, which is likely pre-installed on your system already. And then we have tools like Evans Debugger that we've talked about previously in this course. And then we will talk about obfuscation. So there are different things that a malicious programmer might do in order to try to prevent you from understanding their code. One of the simplest things they can do is to use a program called a packer. A packer is a program that is set up with the intention of taking an executable and making it smaller. There are a number of reasons why you might want to do this legitimately. I can take an executable and compress it, make it smaller so it takes up less disk space. If I'm distributing some software and maybe if I didn't pack it, it wouldn't fit on the media that I want to use, that would be a reason to use a packer. Also, if I had a slow media where it takes a long time to read the information, I might use a packer, and in that case, I'm trading off disk space for memory that I need to expand it once I load it. So depending on your setup, it can either be faster or slower. If you have a really fast processor and slow media speeds, then a packer is great. If you have a slow processor and fast media speeds, let's say a solid state drive or a thumb drive, then a packer is kind of a bad idea. We will talk about some freely available packers, and also there's the possibility that someone will just make their own. The next step up in sophistication when it comes to obfuscation would be something like self-modifying code. So this is the kind of thing where if I try to do static analysis on it, it's just not going to work because the code actually changes itself as it runs. So we'll talk a little bit about that. And then, as I briefly mentioned prior, there are some programs out there that have code that detects that they're running inside of a virtual machine, and then they run differently or don't run at all. So these are just a few ways that a malware author might try to hide what they're doing from the researcher. And that's pretty much what we're going to talk about here in the malware section of this course. So as a reminder, this course is one in a whole family of courses that we have here at Pen Tester Academy, your source for everything InfoSec. And I look forward to seeing you in this course or another course again soon. See you then.